We have Natalia Zanchovska. Natalia is a PhD candidate at the Department of Middle East and North Africa at the University of Łódź in Poland. She held a visiting position at the University of Cambridge, in the University in Tehran, and also at the University in New Delhi. Natalia's research interests include socio-political issues of Asia, especially the socio-political issues in Middle Eastern and Indian Asia. Case studies contemporary Islam in political context and Muslim community in India. Her previous project were focused on the paradox between hierarchical universe of the caste system and the equalitarian requirements of substantive democracy and the perception of the caste system among rural communities in India. Her current study explores Hindu-Muslim relation and growing Islamophobia during the COVID-19 pandemic in India. And today, Natalia would also discuss and present us her research about Islam and the COVID-19 pandemic, religious disinformation in the coronavirus discourse. Thank you, Natalia, for being here. I'm giving now, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Bata, for this kind introduction. Hi, everyone. As it was already mentioned, my name is Natalia Zanchovska, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Middle East and North Africa in the Faculty of International Relations and Political Studies at the University of Łódź. And it's a great pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for having me. Special thanks goes to Global Institute of Law, of course, and Dr. Zubair Abbasi and Bata Pollock, without whom this event wouldn't have been possible. And as it was previously mentioned, in my academic, everyday academic work, as you may have heard, I deal with socio-political aspects of the Arab Muslim world, Varna Jati system in India as well, Indian nationalist movement, which is called Hindutva. I also deal with Hindu-Muslim relations with a particular focus on the times of Corona. Nowadays, I also teach basic and intermediate Arabic at the University of Łódź, and currently I am based in Jordan with the aim of improving my language skills. Today, I'd like to share with you my recent study on prevalent reactions of Islamic scholars and governments of several Muslim and Arab countries towards coronavirus, along with some examples of religion disinformation that has been spread during the pandemic. According to my knowledge, this subject still remains understudied. Hence, my decision to take a closer look at this and try to analyze it more thoroughly. Although my recent study is still in progress, I have already had a chance to present my partial conclusions in the yearly academic conference, 18th Arabic Days in Poland. It took place on the 28th of October this year. And hopefully the paper encompassing the whole subject will be published sometime next year. Before that happens, it's an immense pleasure to share some of my work, some of my conclusions with you today. And to start with, I would like to tell you about the aims of this study. So the aim is to primarily to analyze the reactions of selected Arab Muslim countries, their political organizations, and as well as Islamic scholars' reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we may ask the question, what is the virus and who caused it? What are the Prophet Muhammad's age-old recommendations in case of pandemic? The second thing, in today's presentation, I also refer to religious practices that are supposed to protect and heal, but some of them, may in fact lead to an increased risk of disease. The question arises here, do prayer and hygiene rules that preceded, and I mean Islam here, protect us against infection and virus transmission? Is it legitimate to say that? The third point I want to focus on, I will try and provide you with a number of examples of disinformation policies invoking religion, invoking Islam, that are often at odds with science, and sometimes it directly contradicts science and medical knowledge. And here's an example. We all witnessed Shia pilgrims protesting against the closure of temples in Iran. There was a very famous recording of pilgrims touching and kissing Shia places of worship, temples. For instance, in the city of Qom, and the video went viral very quickly. And it's a great example of this phenomenon that I want to discuss today. To end with, I focus on a few statements of religious leaders that argued that vaccines composition was questionable or was simply haram, which means, of course, prohibited in Islam. Okay, now I would like to start with a few comments on Islam and hygiene. So what are the rules promoted, spread by Prophet Muhammad? So Islam is a religion that covers all aspects of human life, including physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and even hygienic side of it. So Prophet Muhammad promoted hygiene practices as early as the 7th century, and according to them, daily prayer should be preceded by religious ablution, which is known in Arabic as wudu. This means that the faithful must be ritually clean when they enter into prayer. In Islam, it is believed that this ritual builds a culture of purity and reduces the risk of infectious diseases. And based on the authority of Abu Huraira, we learn that the Prophet instructed Muslims to cover their faces when sneezing and coughing, as this will minimize the spread of bacteria and viruses. And I have prepared a few quotes for you. They can be displayed, yes, on the screen. You probably can see the first one already. So I will read it for you in Arabic and then deliver a translation. كان إذا عطس غطى وجهه بيده أو بثوبه وغض بها صوته. Which literally means when he sneezed, he covered his face with his hand or robe and lowered his voice. Another thing worth mentioning is visiting the sick. So here we can learn from Prophet Muhammad that visiting the sick is undoubtedly considered a good deed. It's definitely recognized by Islam. However, in case of an outbreak of pandemic, the Prophet advised his followers to be quarantined in some way so that they would not travel to places known to be affected by the pandemic. And what is more, those who were already staying in infected areas or communities should not leave them so that they wouldn't spread the disease. And the next quote that I prepared, the next ayah is إذا سمعتم به بأرض فلا تقدموا عليه وإذا وقع بأرض وأنتم بها فلا تخرجوا فرارا منه. Which means if you hear that the plague has fallen on an area, don't go there. But if the plague has hit the ground where you are, don't leave it, meaning don't leave this place. And the third ayah, ليس من رجل يقع الطاعون فيمكث في بلده صابرا محتسبا يعلم أنه لا يصيبه إلا ما كتب الله له. There is no man who suffers from the plague who remains patient in his country, seeking his reward, knowing that only God will touch him. Yes, many Muslim scholars therefore referred to Islamic texts, referred to the Quran, referred to the Sunnah, claiming that the measures taken, for example, by the World Health Organization to prevent the spread of the virus, actually comply with the hygiene practices taught by the Prophet Muhammad around 1,400 years ago. Now I would like to move to the next part of my presentation. I will present some of the reactions of religious leaders to the pandemic, to the COVID-19 pandemic. As the coronavirus pandemic spread around the world, some clerics had no hesitation in stating that the virus was sent by God because of mankind's disobedience, because of mankind's sins. Other alims, by alims I mean Islamic scholars, of course, have argued that the pandemic is bringing the world closer to the Judgment Day. And some Shia clergymen claim to have found signs and even confirmation for the return of Mahdi, who is known to be the Muslim savior. Of course, the region that we discuss here is home to a very wide variety of Muslim governments, political parties, militias, and various voices from religious leaders. So their responses to the COVID-19 outbreak weren't and aren't always the same. In fact, they varied and were often contradictory to each other. And we should definitely remember about it, because these voices are in fact different. There is nothing like a monolith here. So my intention here is to keep the proportions, as most feedbacks were based on the recommendations of doctors, was based on the medical knowledge and the latest scientific reports. Muslim moderate parties collaborated with governments and offered its supporters practical advice on how to avoid getting infected with the virus. Nonetheless, some of them relied on political resentment. They also relied on religious interpretations and even conspiracy theories. And this is very much worth mentioning. And this is what I'm particularly focused in my research. For example, a conservative Sunni clergyman referred to conspiracy theories that blamed China, Shia followers, also Israel, as well as so-called West and atheists. The next thing I want to mention is a number of examples of religious disinformation in this coronavirus discourse. I will start with Saudi Arabia. The kingdom mainly blamed Shia Iran for infecting the Gulf region, which was a sort of a reflection of regional tensions there. And so on March the 8th, Saudi Arabia isolated its own Shia population in eastern Qatif province. Most of the cases in Qatif came from people who returned from pilgrimage from Iran, despite a long Saudi ban on traveling there. And as a consequence, Saudi Arabia accused Iran of and that's the quote here, direct responsibility for the rise in COVID-19 infections. Yes, when the first reports of the virus appeared in China, Salafists in Egypt, Morocco, and elsewhere called it a God's soldier. So the coronavirus, being a God soldier, attacked the infidels who worked against it. God's power is, let me quote them. God's power is hitting China, communism, and Buddhism. China declared war on Islam and Muslims, persecuting our Uyghur brothers. Another person that I want to quote here is Abdul Razak al-Mahdi, a Syrian Salafist. He tweeted on January 20th, God gave them a soldier, meaning a virus. And many of God's soldiers said, glory be to him. O God, increase their suffering and affliction until they stop fighting your religion and worshippers. And Egyptian clergymen celebrated that power of God strikes upon the Buddhist communist China. China launched a war, according to him, China launched a war against our Muslim Uyghur brothers, and God sent his soldier, meaning coronavirus. God is not unjust to his worshippers. So that was the quote. The next Arab country I would like to shed some light on is Egypt. So the Minister of Religious Affairs blamed the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt for spreading the coronavirus to innocent people. And these in turn proclaimed that the virus is a divine punishment against the military regime of the ruling president in Egypt, al-Sisi. And in mid-February, Egypt's health minister falsely claimed that Egyptians could not contract the virus. Egyptian regime talk shows also reported that virus was a biological weapon designed to cripple the Chinese economy. On March 13th, police and Egyptian police arrested 3 people on charges of spreading false information about the virus on Facebook. And what is more, authorities also took away press references from one of Guardian reporters working in Egypt who wrote about the underestimation of statistics about the victims of pandemic in Egypt. The next country I want to talk about is Lebanon. And here the health crisis has deepened political tensions and has led to criticism of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is, as you probably know, a leading political power, and the literal translation of it would be a party of God. So it has led to criticism of this particular party. criticism of its long ties with Iran. And Hezbollah political opponents blamed the group, blamed the group's physical contacts with the Iranian officials for the initial spread of COVID-19. So this is how it was explained. In a televised speech on March 13th, the party, Hezbollah, the party's leader, Nasrallah, said the crisis is not intended to get even or to quarrel among Lebanon's religious sects. On April the 10th, he compared this fight against the virus to the 2006 war with Israel. The next example is Algeria. So Algerian news service called Al Masdar published a conspiracy theory under the famous headline, Zionists are behind coronavirus. Now they have found a vaccine. And so Iranian mullah Nasser Makaram Shirazi has stated that it is forbidden to take any Israeli medication for the virus unless there is no other alternative. And here's the quote: "I'd rather take a risk and get sick than take an Israeli vaccine," wrote a well-known journalist of the Iranian television Press TV and editor of the British Muslim news service 5 Pillars. Let me tell you something about the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, called the ISIS. According to the narrative of the so-called Islamic State of ISIS, God's power is hitting China, which has declared war on Islam and Muslims and persecuted our Uyghur brothers. Diseases do not attack by themselves, he said, but on the command and decree of God. When the virus spread in Europe, the so-called Islamic State has also adapted its message and called the disease a so-called painful anguish for all Crusader nations in the West. And the group urged its supporters not to travel to Europe and to stop terrorist attacks, simply to avoid contracting and put yourself at risk in the times of coronavirus. The next example concerns Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is Al-Qaeda working in Syria. So the most powerful Sunni group of jihadists in Syria has instructed its followers not to get distracted from fighting non-believers. And on March the 24th, Abu Maria al-Qahtani, commander of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, called the virus a temporary epidemic. On March the 28th, they reported it in its a newsletter. So it was written there that the virus was sent by God to kill infidels who shed the blood of Muslims around the world. He recommended, and this is a quote again, not to bother with tracking news and reports about the virus. The next example I prepared for you is the statement of International Union of Muslim Scholars based in Qatar. And so on March the 3rd, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the president of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, issued a fatwa allowing Muslims to pray in their homes instead of attending Friday prayer in mosques. By March 14th, the same institution issued a clear call to suspend all the congregational prayers. The next example concerns Morocco. On March 15th, Hassan al-Kitani, a Salafi preacher, challenged the kingdom's plan to shut down the mosques. He posted on Facebook a fatwa in which he wrote that Prophet Muhammad never authorized the idea of closing the mosques or suspending group prayers. Omar al-Hadoshi, another leading Moroccan Salafist, echoed al-Kitani and called the disease, called the pandemic, a soldier of God who conquered great nations such as China that does not believe in God. One of the last examples I wanted to deliver is India. India is one of those places in the world where the problem of Muslim anti-vaccination movements has received very wide coverage, as most of you probably know. However, one cannot speak of a single consistent message from the alims, from the Islamic scholars in the country. Some of them found the Chinese vaccine illegal, prohibited in Islam, haram, because of its alleged animal-based ingredient. Mainly, it was a discussion about pork gelatin. And one alim from Uttar Pradesh, from a Deoband movement, Qari Ishaq Gora, called on Muslims to wait for fatwa before taking the vaccine. Muslims should check what is in the vaccine to make sure that the substances used to make it are allowed in Islam, are shortly speaking halal. That's what he said. In December 2020, in Mumbai, there was a clergy congregation going on, and I wrote a short quote that I found from this particular meeting. Let me read it for you. Even if a pig hair falls into a well, the water from the well is forbidden for Muslims. Therefore, according to Islamic law, a pork gelatin vaccine cannot cure any disease. A similar situation occurred with the controversy over the alleged presence of ingredients such as any ingredients of beef origin, such as cow blood, for instance, and the immediate opposition to the vaccine by many Hindu religious leaders. So the situation was pretty similar in this regard. However, the Sunni Islamic scholar in Lucknow disagreed with the above mentioned interpretation, citing the principle that Islam allows to use all medication in a life-threatening situation, because life protection is prioritized and should be the most important thing. In an interview with India Today TV, Saif Abbas said, if a medicine, even if made of ingredients not allowed in Islam, can save a life, it should be allowed. So as you can notice, the message the message varies. We cannot actually say that the majority of Islamic scholars are kind of inspired by the coronavirus disinformation. That wouldn't be legitimate to say, but there are plenty of examples who prove that this phenomenon definitely exists and is, in my opinion, worth researching. Doubts doubts should have been dispelled by a fatwa issued by an organization enjoying probably the highest authority, which is the Fatwa Council of the UAE. And this fatwa happened some time ago. And that should be the source of knowledge for Muslims around the world. So the council has ruled that coronavirus vaccines are allowed for Muslims even if they contain pork gelatin. So that was the official statement. According to the interpretation of the council, in this case, pork gelatin is considered a medicine, not a food. And the effectiveness of many vaccines against this highly contagious virus, which represents a global threat to a society as a whole, has also been proven to be effective. And that is all that I've prepared for today. Thank you very much for your attention. Beata, you are muted. We cannot hear you.
Yes, thank you so much, Natalia, for this interesting lecture. I have one question. So, I mean, of course, when the whole pandemic started, there was a lot of conspiracy theories, and you know, the whole blaming game started. We could notice the huge wave of racism in the US and in Europe. The racism which was at that time directed to people from China, especially. Even now we can see that, you know, some countries are banning the flights from some other countries with no really reason. So I would like to ask if this all comments which you just quote today about the pandemic as a God punishment, etc. They were made at the beginning of the pandemic, or we still have opinion like this? I want to basically ask if the narrative changed right now, or this Muslim scholars. I mean, it's very small percentage of Muslim scholars who believe that it used to be or it is a God punishment. Is this narrative change right now, or we still can find this kind of comments right now, 2 years after in pandemic, actually?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's actually really great to emphasize this, because yes, as you might guess, the situation has drastically changed, and now since 2 years have already passed, the conspiracy theories are less common, but my intention was to analyze this phenomenon since the very beginning. So in my paper, you will definitely see the process of change, how it developed, how it changed, starting from March 2020. And definitely it should be mentioned here, and I'm glad that you brought this up, that the conspiracy theories are much less common at the moment. And those examples that I mentioned, these were taken from late beginning and also the end of 2020. Some of them, but very few, were taken from 2021. But to be perfectly honest, the trends are much better now, especially when we analyze the Islamic scholars' statements, the official ones. I don't mean the media, let's say, gossips and like unauthorized statements. Let's put that aside. When we analyze the Islamic scholars' statements, there has been a huge progress in it. I would call it this way, because they base, in great majority, they base on medical knowledge and science. So it should be emphasized what I would like to add to that is maybe that the Arab countries' governments, some examples are actually still there until now, until today's. I think they are still kind of playing tricks on their societies, communities. They use the coronavirus to divide people, to control the people, to control the message, and to gain popularity by that. So in politics, the situation is much worse. I would say many political parties still make use of this falsehood and conspiracy theories, but when religion, when Islam and the official Islamic scholar statements are taken into consideration, I would say there is a huge development in that field, and we don't see so many false information spread in this particular aspect. Yeah. I hope I managed to answer your question.
Yes, thank you so much for this answer. One more question is, you mentioned that the Chinese vaccine was quite suspicious, but are there any hierarchy of a vaccine according to, I mean, of course, again, selected Muslim scholars, or there are some vaccines which are considered safer or less safer? How does it work?
So at the very beginning, all the vaccines were deemed suspicious and not entirely safe to use, especially for religious people. But well, the articles that I came across and people who I talked with, they mainly focused on the Chinese vaccine and the Indian vaccine, but so far I haven't received enough data on AstraZeneca or Pfizer vaccine, so I cannot tell you exactly about it yet. Like, I'm in the process of researching it, but according to my respondents, because I've been also conducting some interviews to enrich the study, according to the responses I received, all the vaccines were deemed kind of suspicious, and they were not accepted easily by the religious community, especially the most conservative ones. But the biggest criticism was focused on the Chinese vaccine, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you so much. It was very, very interesting talk. It was an excellent talk, and I'm really looking forward to read your research, to read your paper, and I hope you will collect all the data which are still missing, and we will have a piece of a very, very interesting research. I know you have a class in a bit, so for now I would like to conclude the session, and I hope to see you here again in Global Institute of Law.
Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to seeing you again and collaborating with the GIL once again, many times in the future, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye.